There is a mansion on Ocean Drive in Miami Beach that does not belong to the 21st century. It glows like something transported from a Spanish Renaissance dream, built by a Standard Oil heir who had everything money could buy except the acceptance he craved, then transformed by a fashion king who had conquered the world but could not escape the violence that stalked him through those golden gates. This is the story of Casa Casuarina, not the story you think you know from tabloid headlines and celebrity tours, but the deeper, stranger tale of how an heiress's son created a palace of secrets, how a boy from southern Italy turned it into a temple of mythology and excess, and how a morning's gunshots transformed paradise into a monument to tragedy that tourists still photograph with morbid fascination. If you value deep investigations into architecture, the invisible barriers of class and acceptance, and the forces that shape our most legendary spaces, please like this video and subscribe. Your support makes these detailed explorations possible. Now, let us begin with the blood and the coral steps, and then work backward through nearly a century of dreams and delusions. 1. The Morning Fashion. Died on Ocean Drive, July 15th, 1997. Tuesday, 8:45 in the morning. The Miami sun was already brutal, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer above the pavement. Gianni Versace walked slowly along Ocean Drive, returning from his usual trip to the news cafe. Under his arm, a stack of Italian fashion magazines. On his face, the subtle satisfaction of a man who owned not just a mansion, but an empire worth approximately $807 million. He approached the iron gates of 1116 Ocean Drive. The gates bore the face of Medusa, rendered in gold, that creature from Greek mythology, whose gaze turned men to stone. Versace had placed her there deliberately. Power, captivation, the inability to look away. He reached for his keys. A young man stepped from the shadows. Gray t-shirt, black shorts, white baseball cap pulled low. No words, no warning, just a Taurus pistol raised in a steady hand. 2 shots to the back of Versace's head at point-blank range. The fashion icon collapsed onto the coral stone steps. His blood spread across the porous rock, seeping into the same material that had been quarried from the Florida seabed decades earlier. The magazines scattered. The iron gates stood witness, Medusa's golden face frozen in eternal silence. The killer walked away, not running, walking, calm as someone leaving a coffee shop. Within minutes, the news circled the globe. Gianni Versace, the man who dressed Princess Diana and Elton John, who invented the supermodel phenomenon and brought rock and roll sexuality to high fashion, lay dead on his own doorstep, executed like a common criminal, or perhaps like a symbol, which is what Andrew Cunanan seemed to want. The question that paralyzed Miami for the next 8 days, the question that still echoes through those halls today, was simple and unanswerable. Why? But to understand that morning, to grasp what was actually lost when those bullets shattered Versace's skull, we must travel backward. Back to when Ocean Drive was nothing but sand and possibility. Back to a different kind of dreamer who built this palace for different reasons entirely. 2. The Standard Oil Fortune and the Palace of Secrets, 1930. Alden Freeman stood on a narrow strip of Florida beach and saw what others could not. Where tourists saw scrubland and mosquitoes, he saw the Mediterranean coast. Where developers saw cheap lots for modest hotels, he saw a palazzo worthy of Spanish royalty. Freeman had every reason to see the world differently than ordinary men. His father, Joel Freeman, had served as treasurer of the Standard Oil Trust, the monopolistic empire John D. Rockefeller built to dominate American petroleum. When Joel died, He left his son a fortune so immense that Alden retired at 27 years old. Never worked another day for wages. Never needed to. But wealth creates its own problems, especially when combined with secrets. Alden Freeman was an architect by training, an author by passion, a philanthropist by choice. He was also a man who never married, who lived with his adopted son, Charles Bolton, and Bolton's family, in arrangements that raised eyebrows throughout Miami Beach society. In 1930, such things were whispered about in parlors and speculated upon in private conversations, but never spoken aloud. The consequences would have been devastating. So Freeman built his sanctuary, his palace of acceptable secrets. He had fallen in love with a building during his travels through the Caribbean, the Alcázar de Colón in Santo Domingo, constructed in 1510 by Diego Columbus, son of the explorer, the oldest European residence in the Western Hemisphere. A structure that blended Renaissance grace with Gothic strength, that spoke of power exercised across oceans and centuries. Freeman decided to recreate it in Miami Beach. He hired the Hubble and Hubble Company as contractors. He brought in Addison Misner, the legendary designer who had essentially invented the aesthetic of Palm Beach's mansions. Together, they constructed a Mediterranean revival masterpiece that seemed transported from another century entirely. The walls rose from coralline rock blocks, the same porous limestone that formed the foundation of South Florida itself. Freeman even traveled to Santo Domingo and acquired 2 actual bricks from the original Alcázar, incorporating them into his new palace. One remains embedded on the right side of the main entrance, a piece of 16th century history hidden in plain sight. He named it Casa Casuarina, House of the Australian Pine. The name honored the only tree that survived the devastating 1926 hurricane that had flattened much of Miami Beach. That lone pine had to be cut down for construction, but its memory lived on in the title. Some claimed Freeman chose the name as tribute to Somerset Maugham's story collection, The Casuarina Tree, a work exploring British colonialism and hidden desires. Perhaps both explanations were true. With Freeman, there were always layers. The house that emerged on Ocean Drive was extraordinary by any measure. An observatory tower where Freeman could study the stars in solitude. A replica of the Homage Tower from Santo Domingo's Fortaleza Ozama. Floors made entirely of key lime coral, hand-laid by craftsmen who understood this was no ordinary beach cottage. But the most revealing features were the ones you couldn't see from the street. Freeman built elaborate secret passageways throughout the house, hidden corridors allowing movement from room to room without being observed. False-backed bookcases concealing doorways, trapdoors leading to unexpected spaces. The official explanation was practicality. Servants could move invisibly while guests were entertained. The whispered explanation was darker, more desperate. Freeman needed escape routes, needed to disappear. Throughout the mansion, Freeman installed approximately 100 medallions depicting notable historical figures: Julius Caesar, Mussolini, Lenin, Gandhi, Cleopatra, John D. Rockefeller, whose fortune had made all of this possible. An eclectic collection reflecting Freeman's fascination with power in all its forms, legitimate and otherwise. At the center of the property stood a courtyard, and within that courtyard, the single most significant piece of art in the entire house, a bronze statue called the Kneeling Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, sculpted in 1928 by Yugoslavian artist Vuk Vucinic. Freeman had been Vucinic's patron, and this statue represented both their artistic collaboration and something deeper. The kneeling goddess offered herself to anyone who entered, a symbol of welcome and invitation that could be interpreted multiple ways depending on who was looking. The property contained 24 separate apartments. Freeman lived in the top floor front apartment on the southeast corner, commanding views of both ocean and city. The remaining 23 units were theoretically available for rent, but Freeman more often filled them with friends, artists, fellow travelers who shared his unconventional worldview. He dreamed of creating a bohemian society, a gathering place for fascinating people who existed on the margins of acceptable Miami Beach society. For 7 years, Alden Freeman lived in his Mediterranean sanctuary. He hosted parties beneath the stars. He welcomed writers and artists and adventurers into his secret-filled halls. He climbed to his observatory tower and watched the same constellations that had guided Columbus across the Atlantic. And then, on December 29th, 1937, following a prolonged illness, Alden Freeman died in the house he loved. He was buried with his secrets intact. Charles Bolton inherited the property and immediately sold it for $100,000 to a man named Jacques Amsterdam. The new owner had zero interest in maintaining Freeman's artistic vision or bohemian dreams. Amsterdam saw only real estate potential, only profit margins and rental income. He converted Casa Casuarina into a 30-unit apartment building, renaming it the Amsterdam Palace. He installed an elevator shaft where Freeman's original bell had hung. He replaced the lily pond in the courtyard with practical terrazzo flooring. He moved the kneeling Aphrodite statue from the courtyard to the front terrace, where she would greet visitors for decades to come. Rooms that had once hosted artists and philosophers now rented for $600 a month during winter season and just $30 in summer. The mansion Freeman built to escape the world's judgment became just another tourist apartment building on a beach full of tourist apartment buildings. The Amsterdam Palace passed through several owners over the following decades. For a time in the 1980s, it was called the Christopher Columbus Apartments, a nod to its architectural heritage that few tenants understood or cared about. By then, the building had fallen into serious disrepair. Paint peeled. The secret passageways grew dusty and forgotten. The medallions of world leaders stared blindly at tenants who had no idea Julius Caesar was watching them from the walls. South Beach itself had become a forgotten neighborhood. The Art Deco buildings that had defined the district's glory days in the 1930s and 1940s were crumbling. Preservationists struggled to convince city officials that anything was worth saving. Miami Beach's redevelopment director, Stuart Rogel, admitted to the Miami Herald in 1987. Until recently, the city had the idea that nothing was worth saving in the Art Deco district. It looked old, it looked bad, and we wanted to get rid of it. The Christopher Columbus Apartments sat neglected on Ocean Drive, slowly dissolving under the relentless Florida sun and salt air. Only the kneeling Aphrodite remained on the front terrace, still offering her eternal welcome to anyone who passed by. And then, in 1992, a man on vacation stopped in front of the statue and fell in love. 3. The boy from Reggio Calabria who conquered fashion. To understand who this man was, we must travel far from Miami's sun-drenched shores, across the Atlantic to the ancient streets of southern Italy, to a town called Reggio Calabria, nestled at the very tip of the Italian boot, where the Mediterranean Sea sparkles beneath towering mountains. December 2nd, 1946. Giovanni Maria Versace came into the world. The Versace family was not wealthy by any traditional measure. Gianni's father, Antonio, worked as an appliance salesman, going door to door in a region still recovering from World War II's devastation. But his mother, Francesca, was different. She ran a successful dressmaking business from her own boutique, creating beautiful garments for the women of Reggio Calabria. From his earliest memories, young Gianni was surrounded by fabric and form, color and creation. The couture workroom became his playground. While other children kicked balls in the street, Gianni sat among scraps of silk and velvet, watching his mother transform flat pieces of cloth into three-dimensional works of art that made women feel beautiful, powerful, desirable. He made puppets from the leftover material, staging elaborate shows for his family. At 9 years old, he designed his first real dress from his mother's scraps. She was surprised, delighted. The boy had genuine talent. But something else was forming in young Gianni's imagination, something that would define his entire aesthetic philosophy. Reggio Calabria had once been part of Magna Graecia, the great Greek civilization that colonized southern Italy starting in the 8th century BC. The ancient influence was everywhere, in the architecture, in the culture, in the ruins that dotted the landscape like broken teeth from a forgotten giant. As a child, Gianni played in those ruins, exploring archaeological sites with his older brother Santo and younger sister Donatella. During one exploration, Gianni found a marble head buried in the earth, a fragment of ancient sculpture, depicting a face of haunting beauty and power. He became obsessed with Greek and Roman mythology. He studied the stories of gods and monsters, heroes and villains. One figure captivated him above all others: Medusa. In mythology, Medusa was a gorgon, a creature with snakes for hair, who could turn anyone who looked at her to stone. But she was also beautiful. Before the goddess Athena cursed her, Medusa had been so lovely that anyone who gazed upon her fell instantly in love. This duality fascinated young Gianni: beauty and danger, the power to captivate and the power to destroy, the irresistible force that freezes you in place, unable to look away, even though you know you should. He would carry this image with him throughout his life. Medusa would become his symbol, his brand, his philosophy rendered in a single face. After high school, Gianni worked in his mother's shop, learning the technical skills that would later set him apart from designers who could sketch but couldn't construct. He learned how fabric moved, how seams created structure, how a single stitch could make the difference between elegant and ordinary. But he knew Reggio Calabria was too small for his dreams. In 1972, at 26, he moved to Milan. The fashion capital of Italy welcomed him with opportunities. Gianni found work designing for established Italian labels: Jenny, Complis, Callahan, Mario Valentino. He was a freelancer, moving from house to house, learning the business from every angle, learning who had real power and who just pretended, learning that fashion was about money and class and desire, not just beautiful clothes. His design stood out immediately. While other Italian designers favored muted colors and restrained elegance, Gianni pushed boundaries. He used bright colors that seemed to vibrate with energy. He created bold prints that announced themselves across a room. He cut fabric in ways that celebrated the human body, rather than hiding it beneath layers of acceptable modesty. Women who wore his clothes felt powerful, felt sexual, felt dangerous. In 1978, with backing from the Italian fashion family Girombelli, Gianni established his own company. Gianni Versace SPA held its first ready-to-wear show that same year, launching a women's wear collection that announced a new voice in fashion. He was 31 years old. From the beginning, Versace was a family affair. His brother Santo became CEO, handling the business side with ruthless efficiency, while Gianni focused on creation. His sister, Donatella, served as vice president and creative consultant. She became his muse, his closest collaborator, the one person who could tell him the truth when everyone else was blinded by his genius or terrified of his temper. Donatella's husband, Paul Beck, later joined as menswear director. The Versace family had built an empire on loyalty, blood, and an absolute refusal to compromise their vision for anyone. Throughout the 1980s, Gianni Versace pushed fashion to new extremes. In 1982, he invented Oroton, a revolutionary super light chain mail that moved like liquid metal. It became his signature, catching light like armor made for a warrior goddess. That same year, he expanded into jewelry and housewares, refusing to license his name to manufacturers who would dilute his aesthetic. Unlike other designers who took the money and looked away, Versace retained complete creative control over every product bearing his name. His detractors called his designs vulgar, bondage gear masquerading as evening wear, polyvinyl chloride baby doll dresses that looked like prostitutes' uniforms, silver mesh togas that left nothing to imagination. The fashion establishment sneered at his flashy aesthetic, at his refusal to respect the invisible boundaries between good taste and excess. But Versace was designing for a new generation, for women who wanted to feel powerful and desirable, not demure and acceptable, for a world where sexuality was becoming liberation rather than shame. In 1989, the firm expanded into haute couture with the launch of Atelier Versace at the Ritz Hotel in Paris. That same year, he began designing costumes for the San Francisco Opera, bringing his theatrical sensibility to actual theater. But Versace's greatest innovation was his understanding of celebrity. He was the first designer to truly grasp the value of famous faces in the front row. He invented the supermodel phenomenon of the 1990s, featuring Naomi Campbell, Christy Turlington, and Linda Evangelista in runway shows and advertising campaigns that blurred the line between fashion and entertainment. The world never forgot his autumn-winter 1991 collection. Every top model walked together as George Michael's Freedom 90 blasted through the speakers. Linda Evangelista, Cindy Crawford, Naomi Campbell, and Christy Turlington walked arm in arm, celebrating a new era where models were celebrities and beauty was power. These weren't just models. They were Versace's supermodels, women so famous they could command $10,000 per day and, as Evangelista famously said, wouldn't get out of bed for less than that. Versace became friends with the people he dressed: Princess Diana, Madonna, Elton John, Tupac Shakur. He and his partner, Antonio D'Amico, became fixtures on the international party scene, photographed at premieres and galas and private islands. Gianni Versace was not simply a designer. He was a lifestyle brand before that term even existed. By the early 1990s, Versace had built an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had boutiques across the world, from Milan to Tokyo to New York. He had conquered fashion and celebrity and commerce. But something was missing. He needed a home that reflected who he had become, a palace worthy of a king. 4. When the Fashion King Met the Goddess, 1992. Summer in Miami Beach. Gianni Versace was vacationing with his family, exploring the Art Deco district that was just beginning its revival after decades of decline. Buildings were being restored. New restaurants and clubs were opening. There was energy here, a sense of possibility that reminded him of his own rise from small-town Italy to international fame. As he walked down Ocean Drive, he passed a rundown apartment building at 1116. It looked neglected, almost abandoned. Paint peeling, windows broken. The kind of place developers tore down without a second thought. But something caught his eye. Standing on the front terrace was a bronze statue of a woman kneeling in eternal grace, the kneeling Aphrodite, Greek goddess of love and beauty, the same mythology that had captivated him as a boy, exploring ruins in Reggio Calabria. Gianni Versace stopped in his tracks. As his sister Donatella later told the New York Times, "We took a walk in South Beach, and Johnny just stopped in front of the building and said, 'I want this house.'" Behind the statue, through the peeling paint and broken shutters, Versace saw something others could not. He saw the Spanish architecture that echoed his beloved Mediterranean. He saw the potential for grandeur hidden beneath years of neglect. He saw a canvas on which he could paint his ultimate vision. Within weeks, Gianni Versace purchased Casa Casuarina for $2,950,000. He was about to transform Alden Freeman's dream into something the world had never seen. The house that Versace bought was a shadow of its former glory. 24 cramped apartments, secret passageways sealed behind drywall. The courtyard was bare terrazzo, but Versace saw beyond the decay. He saw the bones of greatness. To realize his vision, he needed more space. Next door stood an Art Deco hotel called the Revere, built in 1950. Despite strong opposition from the Miami Design Preservation League, who argued the building had historical significance, Versace purchased it for $3,700,000 with one purpose. He was going to demolish it. The destruction of the Revere allowed Versace to add a south wing to his property. More importantly, it gave him space for his grandest project, a swimming pool and garden that would become the centerpiece of his new home. Over the next 3 years, he invested an additional $32 million in renovations. The total cost of his Miami mansion approached $40 million, making it one of the most expensive private residences in America. But for Versace, this was never about investment. This was about creation, about building a temple to beauty and mythology and the celebration of everything he believed the human body could be. Versace transformed the 24 cramped apartments into 10 luxurious suites in the original house and 2 additional suites in the new south wing. Each room became a different dream. Donatella's bedroom featured a canvas painted in Milan on the ceiling. Santo had a suite with furniture covered in Versace velvet. There were rooms for visiting friends like Madonna and Elton John, each designed to reflect the personality of its intended guest. But the true marvel was the pool. Versace designed it himself, drawing inspiration from his Marine Vanitas scarf collection. The pool stretched 54 feet in length, lined with more than 1 million individual tiles and pieces of 24-karat gold. 1 million tiles, hand-placed by craftsmen who understood they were creating art, not just a swimming pool. At the center of the pool's floor, looking up at swimmers through the crystal water, was the face of Poseidon, god of the sea, god of earthquakes and horses and the untamable depths. Surrounding the pool, Versace created an elaborate mosaic garden. The largest Medusa in the entire house dominated the pool deck, her face surrounded by the Greek key pattern that represented infinity, the eternal return, the cycle that never ends. Sirens decorated the edges, those mythological creatures who sang to sailors and lured them to their deaths on rocky shores. 4 large urns designed by Versace himself stood guard on both sides of the pool. The entire space was a symphony of mythology and luxury, a tribute to the ancient world Gianni had loved since childhood. The dining room became a pebbled grotto, as if guests were dining in an underwater cave. Mirrors from an actual Venetian palazzo were installed in the drawing room. Statues from a French chateau surrounded the pool. Murals covered walls and ceilings, commissioned from artisans across Europe. Stained glass windows filtered sunlight into rainbows. Even the toilet was made of marble, reportedly costing $10,000. Because why not? If you're going to build paradise, paradise extends to every corner. Everywhere you looked, Medusa appeared. The head of the mythological monster was embedded in iron gates, rendered in gold bas-relief on walls, watching from floor tiles and ceiling decorations. For Versace, Medusa represented power. When people look at Medusa, he once explained to an interviewer, they become stone. I want people to look at my brand and be similarly captivated. And captivated they were. When Versace hosted parties at Casa Casuarina, the world took notice. Presidents and princes walked through his golden gates. Movie stars swam in his gilded pool. Fashion icons gathered in his mythological garden. Versace's presence transformed South Beach. His celebrity parties were a hallmark of the neighborhood's resurgence. Photographers camped outside his gates. Tourists stopped to stare. Ocean Drive, once neglected and forgotten, became one of the most famous addresses on earth. Inside those walls, Gianni Versace found peace. He had homes in Milan and New York, but Miami was different. Here, he could escape the constant pressure of the fashion world. Here, he could spend lazy afternoons by his pool, reading Italian magazines, dreaming of new designs. Here, he could climb to his observatory tower, the same tower Alden Freeman had built decades before, and look up at the same stars. He lived at Casa Casuarina with Antonio D'Amico, his partner of more than 15 years. Together, they created a life of extraordinary beauty in a world that still, in the mid-1990s, barely tolerated their relationship. In 1993, Versace received devastating news. He had been diagnosed with a rare cancer of the inner ear. He was forced to slow down, passing more responsibilities to his family. Donatella took on more design work. Santo handled corporate decisions. He won that battle. By 1997, Versace had overcome the cancer and was facing life with renewed vigor. At 50 years old, with his health restored and creativity at its peak, Gianni Versace was planning to take his company public. The Versace empire would be valued at over $800 million. He would become not just a fashion icon, but a legitimate business titan. He did not know that a young man from California had been watching him, waiting for him, planning to end his life on the coral steps of Casa Casuarina. 5. The spree killer who wanted fame more than life. Andrew Philip Cunanan was born on August 31st, 1969, in National City, California. He was the youngest of 4 children, raised by a Filipino-American father named Modesto, who had served in the United States Navy, and an Italian-American mother named Mary Ann. From the outside, the Cunanan family appeared ordinary, lower middle class, striving. The American dream pursued with immigrant determination. But inside their home, a troubled genius was being shaped by privilege and lies. From his earliest years, Andrew was treated differently than his siblings. His father saw something special in the boy, an intelligence that bordered on extraordinary. By the age of 10, Andrew had reportedly read an entire set of encyclopedias and memorized their contents. You could ask him any question, his brother Christopher later told ABC News. Pick up any edition and ask him any question, and he would tell you. Modesto showered his youngest son with gifts and attention. While his siblings shared rooms and wore hand-me-downs, Andrew received a sports car. He attended the exclusive Bishop School in San Diego, rubbing shoulders with children of wealthy families. His father wanted Andrew to believe he belonged among the elite, even if the family's finances could not support that fantasy forever. The fantasy crumbled in 1988. Facing fraud charges related to his work as a stockbroker, Modesto Cunanan fled to the Philippines, abandoning his family overnight. The comfortable life Andrew had known vanished. His mother, left behind to face creditors and shame, struggled to survive. The boy, who had been raised to believe he was destined for greatness, suddenly had nothing. Andrew Cunanan responded to this trauma by creating a new reality. He began telling elaborate lies about his background, his connections, his wealth. He claimed his father was a wealthy plantation owner in the Philippines. He said he had attended elite universities. He invented friendships with celebrities and implied relationships with powerful men. The lies became so intricate, so detailed, that even close friends could not separate fact from fiction. After dropping out of the University of California, San Diego, Cunanan discovered a way to fund his fantasies. He was handsome, charming, and intelligent. Wealthy older men in San Diego's gay community were drawn to him. He became what some called a kept man, a gigolo, allowing patrons to support his lifestyle in exchange for companionship and whatever else they desired. They bought him designer clothes. Versace, of course. Always Versace. They took him on trips to Europe. They gave him credit cards with generous limits. For a time, the fantasy seemed real again. But it was never enough. Cunanan craved recognition beyond what his patrons could provide. He wanted to be famous, not just comfortable. He wanted the world to know his name. And somewhere in the darkness of his increasingly unstable mind, a terrible plan began to form. In the fall of 1996, Cunanan's most generous patron, a wealthy man named Norman Blackford, ended their arrangement. The credit cards stopped. The trips ended. The designer clothes became reminders of a lifestyle slipping away. Cunanan maxed out his remaining credit and watched his world collapse for the second time. By the spring of 1997, Andrew Cunanan had reached a breaking point. The charming young man who'd once dazzled San Diego society was now desperate, unstable, and consumed by rage. On April 27, 1997, he began to kill. His first victim was Jeffrey Trail, a 28-year-old former naval officer who had become a friend in San Diego. Cunanan traveled to Minneapolis, where Trail was working as a district manager for a propane company. After an argument in the apartment of another friend, David Madsen, Cunanan beat Trail to death with a hammer. The attack was brutal, savage, the work of someone who had lost all connection to humanity. David Madsen, 33, became the second victim. Authorities believe Kunanen held Madsen in the apartment with Trail's body for 2 days before forcing him into a car and driving to an isolated area outside Minneapolis. There, Kunanen shot Madsen 3 times with Trail's gun and left his body near East Rush Lake. May 3rd, less than a week after the first murder. The killing had changed something in Andrew Kunanen. He was no longer the gigolo, the charming companion. He was a spree killer. And, as one investigator later put it, this was a guy who tasted blood, loved it, and was empowered by it. From Minnesota, Kunanen drove to Chicago. On May 4th, he targeted a stranger, 72-year-old Lee Miglin, a prominent real estate developer. Kunanen gained access to Miglin's mansion and committed acts of horrifying violence. He bound his victim's hands and feet, wrapped his face in tape, stabbed him repeatedly with a screwdriver, sawed at Miglin's throat with a hacksaw. Then he stole Miglin's Lexus and disappeared. The FBI officially joined the hunt on May 7th. They interviewed friends, family, anyone who might know where Kunanen was heading. But Kunanen was smart. He knew how to disappear. On May 9th, he surfaced in Pennsville, New Jersey. He needed to abandon Miglin's car, which could be traced. He found a cemetery and spotted a caretaker named William Reese, 45 years old, a husband and father who had done nothing wrong except cross Kunanen's path. Kunanen shot Reese and took his red pickup truck. 4 murders in less than 2 weeks. A cross-country trail of blood. The FBI placed Andrew Kunanen on their 10 most wanted fugitives list on June 12, 1997, the 449th addition to that infamous roster. His face appeared on television screens across America. America's Most Wanted featured him. Newspapers ran his photograph. The hunt intensified, but Kunanen had already vanished into the one place where he felt most at home, the glamorous, anonymous world of South Beach, Miami. He arrived sometime in mid-May, checking into a rundown hotel called the Normandy Plaza, under a false name. For 2 months, he lived in plain sight. He visited gay clubs. He pawned stolen goods using his real identification. He ate at local restaurants. On July 11th, just 4 days before the final murder, he was recognized by an employee at a Miami Beach sandwich shop who had seen his face on America's Most Wanted. The employee called police. But when officers arrived, Kunanen was gone. The question that haunted investigators then, and haunts them still, is why Gianni Versace became Kunanen's final target. Some believe the 2 men had met years earlier, possibly at a party in San Francisco when Versace was in town to receive recognition for costumes he had designed for the San Francisco Opera. Kunanen reportedly boasted to friends about knowing the famous designer, about their friendship, about their connection. The Versace family has always denied that the 2 men ever met. Others believe Kunanen chose Versace precisely because he was famous. Andrew wanted the world to know his name. Killing a celebrity would guarantee that. As former FBI profiler Candace DeLong explained, the world would know 2 things after the murder of Gianni Versace. They would know who Versace was, and they would know his killer was Andrew Kunanen. That is what Andrew wanted. Look at me. I can get to anyone. Whatever his motivation, Kunanen spent his final week watching and waiting. He learned Versace's routines. He knew the designer walked to the news cafe most mornings to buy Italian magazines. He knew the route back to Casa Casuarina. He knew exactly where to position himself for the kill. 6. The execution and the 8-day manhunt, July 15, 1997. Morning. Andrew Cunanan woke in his dingy hotel room and prepared to commit the murder that would make him infamous. He dressed in a gray t-shirt, black shorts, and a white baseball cap. He packed a backpack. He tucked the same Taurus pistol he had used to kill Madsen and Reese into his waistband. Across town, Gianni Versace began what he expected to be an ordinary day. He had arrived in Miami just days earlier from his palazzo in Milan, looking forward to a quiet summer at his beloved Casa Casuarina. The morning was warm and bright. The ocean sparkled beyond Ocean Drive. Versace decided to walk to the news cafe himself rather than send an assistant. It was a decision that would cost him his life. At approximately 8:30, Versace left Casa Casuarina and walked the few blocks to the cafe. He bought his usual stack of magazines, perhaps exchanged pleasantries with the staff who knew him well. One hostess later reported that he seemed wary that morning, walking past the entrance and circling back before entering. Perhaps he sensed something was wrong. Perhaps it was nothing. At 8:45, Versace returned to his mansion. He climbed the coral stone steps to the iron gates adorned with Medusa's golden face. He reached for his keys. Andrew Cunanan emerged from the shadows. Without a word, he raised the pistol and fired twice into the back of Versace's head at point-blank range. The fashion icon collapsed onto the steps, blood spreading across the coral stone, magazines scattering across the ground. The iron gates standing witness, Medusa's face frozen in eternal silence. A witness saw the shooting and gave chase, following Cunanan as he fled toward a nearby parking garage. But the killer disappeared into the shadows, vanishing as completely as he had appeared. Inside the garage, police later found William Reese's stolen red pickup truck. They found Cunanan's clothes. They found newspaper clippings about his earlier murders, proof that he had followed his own notoriety with obsessive interest. Gianni Versace was pronounced dead at Jackson Memorial Hospital at 9:21 that morning. He was 50 years old. The news exploded across the world. Fashion's king had been executed on the steps of his own palace. Television crews descended on Ocean Drive. Photographers captured the blood-stained steps, the scattered magazines, the iron gates that now symbolized tragedy rather than glamour. Inside Casa Casuarina, Antonio D'Amico collapsed in grief. The man who had shared Versace's life for 15 years heard the gunshots from inside the house and rushed outside to find his partner dying. A massive manhunt for Andrew Cunanan paralyzed South Beach for the next 8 days. Police went door to door through the Art Deco district. Helicopters circled overhead day and night. SWAT teams stood ready at every reported sighting. The FBI warned that Cunanan was chameleon-like in his ability to change his appearance, that he could look different in every photograph ever taken of him. Tips flooded in from across the country, thousands of reported sightings. But the killer seemed to have vanished into the humid Miami air like a ghost. The entire city lived in fear. Was Cunanan still in South Beach? Would he kill again? Every young man in a baseball cap became a suspect. Every shadow seemed to hide a murderer. 8 days later, on July 23rd, a caretaker for a luxury houseboat approximately 2 miles north of the Versace mansion heard a single gunshot echo across the water. Police surrounded the vessel within minutes and eventually breached it with weapons drawn. Inside, they found Andrew Cunanan dead from a self-inflicted wound to the head. He had used the same Taurus pistol that had killed Trail, Madsen, Reese, and Versace. The nightmare was over. He left no note. He offered no explanation. The question of why he murdered 5 people across 3 months and 4 states would never be answered. In the aftermath, investigators searched for clues that might explain the connection between Cunanan and Versace. They found none that satisfied. Some suggested Cunanan had been HIV positive and blamed Versace, though his autopsy revealed he was HIV negative. Others speculated about rejected advances or perceived slights. The truth died with Andrew Cunanan on that houseboat. What remained was grief, shock, and a mansion stained by blood. 7. The legacy of Paradise Lost. The world mourned Gianni Versace with an outpouring of emotion rarely seen for a fashion designer. Memorial services were held on multiple continents. In Milan, 2,000 mourners gathered at the Gothic cathedral for a funeral mass. Princess Diana sat in the pews just weeks before her own tragic death in Paris. Elton John, who had been one of Versace's closest friends, wept openly throughout the service. Naomi Campbell, the supermodel Versace had helped create, could barely stand under the weight of her grief. Even Giorgio Armani, Versace's greatest rival in Italian fashion, came to pay respects to the man who had pushed him to be better. Whitney Houston performed at one memorial. John Bon Jovi sang at another. The tributes painted a portrait of a man who had been not just a designer, but a force of nature who had transformed everyone he touched. Donatella Versace, Johnny's beloved sister and creative partner, was devastated. But she had made a promise to her brother, and she intended to keep it. She took over as head designer for the Versace label. Santo continued as CEO. The empire would survive, but Casa Casuarina sat empty. For 3 years after the murder, no one lived in the mansion that Versace had transformed with such passion. The golden pool grew still. The Medusa mosaics watched over empty courtyards. Tourists gathered outside the gates, but now they came to photograph the steps where Versace had fallen, the spot where his blood had stained the coral stone. In September of 2000, Donatella finally sold the property. The buyer was Peter Lofton, a telecommunications magnate from North Carolina, who paid $19 million. It was a fraction of what Versace had invested in the property. Proof that even the most magnificent homes carry the weight of their histories. Lofton attempted to revive the mansion's glamour. He renovated the property and used it as a private residence, a boutique hotel, and an exclusive membership club. He hosted parties and private events, charging thousands of dollars for access to Versace's world. Interior designer Katja Bates was brought in to restore the property to how Versace had originally imagined it. Some of the golden tiles were replaced. The murals were touched up. The Medusa still watched from every surface. But the shadow of tragedy lingered over the property like a permanent storm cloud. By 2009, Lofton had filed for bankruptcy. The mansion that had cost Versace nearly $40 million and sold for $19 million was now struggling to survive. Casa Casuarina went on the auction block once again, its future uncertain, its gilded halls echoing with emptiness. In September of 2013, the mansion sold at auction for $41.5 million. The winning bidder was VM South Beach LLC, owned by the Nakash family, founders of the Jordache clothing empire that had dominated American fashion in the 1980s. They outbid several competitors, including a notable bid from Donald and Eric Trump, who had hoped to add the legendary property to their real estate portfolio. The Nakash family saw an opportunity to transform Casa Casuarina into something new while honoring its extraordinary past. Since 2015, The mansion has operated as the Villa Casa Casuarina, a luxury boutique hotel with 10 unique suites that each tell their own story. Guests can now sleep in the very rooms where Versace once entertained Madonna, Elton John, and Princess Diana. They can swim in the legendary pool lined with 24-karat gold and more than 1 million hand-placed tiles. They can dine in a gourmet restaurant named Gianni's, seated on Versace-designed Rosenthal china, surrounded by the murals, frescoes, and mosaics he commissioned from artisans around the world. The irony is not lost on visitors. The most private of homes has become the most public of destinations. The mansion that Versace built as a sanctuary now welcomes paying strangers into his bedroom, his dining room, his most intimate spaces. Rooms that once hosted exclusive parties now book for over $1,000 per night. A resident artist remains on staff, carefully maintaining the intricate tile work and frescoes that Versace so lovingly created. The kneeling Aphrodite still stands at the entrance, welcoming visitors with love, just as she welcomed Alden Freeman's friends nearly a century ago. The secret passageways have mostly been sealed, though whispers persist that some remain, hidden behind walls that have witnessed too much. The mansion has become one of the most photographed locations in America. According to some counts, the second most Instagrammed site in the United States. Tourists still gather outside the gates on Ocean Drive, posing for pictures in front of the spot where Versace fell. Some find this macabre, others see it as tribute. The line between fascination and exploitation has always been thin. Inside those walls, the ghosts of the past seem to linger. Staff members and guests have reported strange occurrences over the years. Unexplained sounds in empty hallways. The feeling of being watched. Some say the spirit of Gianni Versace still wanders the halls he loved so much, unable to leave the paradise he created. Others dismiss such stories as imagination fueled by tragedy. What cannot be dismissed is the legacy that Casa Casuarina represents. It is a monument to ambition, to creativity, to the extraordinary power of vision to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. Alden Freeman saw a piece of sand and sky and imagined a Mediterranean palace rising from the Florida coast. Gianni Versace saw a crumbling apartment building and imagined a temple to beauty, mythology, and the celebration of human form. Both men poured their souls into these walls, and something of those souls remains long after their bodies have turned to dust. The mansion also stands as a monument to the darkness that can shadow even the brightest lives. Andrew Cunanan's senseless violence shattered the dream that Versace had built with such passion and care. It ended a life that had brought beauty, glamour, and joy to millions around the world. It turned a symbol of achievement into a symbol of tragedy. The coral steps where Versace fell have been cleaned and polished countless times over the decades. But the memory of that blood remains etched in the consciousness of everyone who passes by those iron gates. Perhaps that is the ultimate lesson of Casa Casuarina. Beauty and tragedy are forever intertwined. The places we build to escape the world cannot protect us from its horrors. Even the most magnificent palace is only stone and tile, vulnerable to the chaos of human violence. Epilogue: the house that cannot forget. Today, the sun still rises over Ocean Drive, casting golden light across the palm trees and pastel buildings. The Atlantic still sparkles beyond the beach. The iron gates of Casa Casuarina still bear their golden Medusa, that symbol of power and petrification that Versace loved so much. Tourists still stop to stare. They take their photographs. They wonder about the glamorous parties and the famous guests. They whisper about the murder and the mystery. And then they move on, leaving the mansion to its memories. Inside, the pool still glimmers with its million golden tiles. Poseidon still gazes up through the crystal water. The sirens still line the edges, those mythological creatures who sang sailors to their doom. Perhaps Versace, with his love of Greek mythology, would have appreciated the irony. Even he, the king of fashion, could not resist the fatal song that called him home that July morning. Gianni Versace believed that Medusa represented the power to captivate, to freeze people in their tracks with beauty so overwhelming they could not look away. In death, he achieved exactly that. Nearly 3 decades after his murder, people still cannot look away from his story, his mansion, his tragic end. Casa Casuarina endures. Its walls hold nearly a century of secrets, dreams, and nightmares. From Alden Freeman's Bohemian Paradise to Jacques Amsterdam's rental apartments, to Gianni Versace's Gilded Palace, to the boutique hotel it is today, this house has witnessed the full spectrum of human experience, joy and sorrow, creation and destruction, life and death. The kneeling Aphrodite still offers her welcome at the entrance. The Medusa still watches from the gates. And somewhere in those halls, in the space between the walls, the echoes of laughter and gunshots, of champagne toasts and screams, continue to reverberate. This is Casa Casuarina. This is the Versace mansion. This is the house where fashion's king was executed on a bright July morning in 1997, and where his spirit, some say, has never truly departed from the paradise he created with such love and devotion. The story of this mansion is the story of America itself, of immigrants who crossed oceans and built empires from nothing but dreams and determination, of visionaries who saw beauty where others saw only decay, of artists who created monuments to human creativity, of violence that can shatter even the most carefully constructed paradise, of memory and legacy that refuse to fade no matter how many years pass. Stand outside those iron gates today, as thousands do every year, and you can almost feel it pressing against you. The weight of history, the whisper of ghosts who cannot find rest, the lingering scent of expensive perfume, and the echo of champagne glasses clinking. The eternal question that hangs in the warm Miami air, carried on the same breeze that rustles the palm trees along Ocean Drive. Why did it have to end this way? There is no answer. There never will be. Andrew Cunanan took his secrets to a watery grave, and Gianni Versace's voice was silenced forever on those coral steps. All that remains is the mansion. Beautiful, haunted, eternal. A dream in stone and gold that became a nightmare, and yet somehow still stands, still glitters, still captivates all who pass by, just as Medusa intended, just as Gianni Versace, in all his brilliant tragic glory, would have understood.